Good evening. I call the Johnson City Commission meeting on April the 16th to order. Tonight, our pastor leading our invocation will be introduced by our vice mayor.
Wymer of the Grandview Christian Church across the street from our own Pine Oaks Golf Course.
Pastor.
Let's pray. God, thank you for this community with its broad variety of people and organizations. Be with our national leaders, our state leaders, and now specifically our city leaders as they meet tonight. We hear every day about how we're all in this together and how we're stronger together and how these are unique times. And as true and good as those statements may be, it is here in this meeting where sometimes conflicting needs collide. So grant wisdom to these commissioners who weigh the needs and the resources and the challenges before them. Bless those who are working extra hard right now because of the current health crisis. Bless those who aren't working because of the crisis. Bless those who are isolated, those who cannot stay isolated because of their calling. Bless those who have loved ones in the hospital but cannot visit, and those who are in the hospital alone. We pray for healing and wholeness during this time especially. And thank you that we all get to work toward the flourishing of this beautiful city, nestled in this beautiful place. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. And now we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Peterson, I will turn it over to you.
Your first order of business is consideration of the minutes from your special called city commission meeting held on Monday, March the 30th.
Commissioners?
Move for approval.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any other comment or questions? Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wise,
Yes.
and Mayor Brock.
Yes.
The next order of business is consideration of the minutes for the city commission meeting held on Thursday, April the 2nd.
Move approve.
Second.
All right, motion and a second. Any other comments or questions? Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wise,
Yes.
and Mayor Brock.
Yes.
At this time, I would like to ask Dr. David Kirschke from the Northeast Tennessee Regional Health Office to join us. As we're all aware, we're in the midst of a battle with a pandemic that is running rampant throughout our world and our country. And through his guidance and the help of several other health professionals, we've made some really big decisions in the last 4 or 5 weeks about how we conduct business and how we interact with each other. And I've asked Dr. Kirschke to join us this evening to give us an update on where we are in our war with this virus and what we may look to see over the next few weeks or coming months as we begin, hopefully, a transition from mitigation to recovery planning. I just thought this would be a really good time for Dr. Kirschke to update us and to give you an opportunity perhaps to ask some questions of Dr. Kirschke. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Kirschke and look forward to hearing what you have to say, sir.
Okay, well, so our current situation in Washington County, I don't know what the number of cases is said on the website, 40-something cases probably. We've had in the region, I guess more or less a slow but steady number of cases. So we're getting between 3 and 5 cases per day, new cases in the region. So can't really tell if it's increasing, decreasing, but it just seems to be kind of steady. So kind of makes it hard. Everyone's like wondering when the peak is. I think we've been doing a good job with social distancing so that hopefully we're not going to see, it might be hard to tell when the peak is. So if we're flattening the curve enough, there's not going to be necessarily a peak. So at this time, I think about 38% of our cases are from community spread. Well, actually, mostly are from contacts to known cases. I would say about a quarter to a third of our cases are from community spread. So there's no clear contact. There's no travel history. It looks like they've gotten it in our community. We're up over 100 cases for the region now. So in terms of, we know that at the end of the month is kind of a timeline for some decisions about reopening things. I'm not really privy to what the governor is talking about in terms of, or who he's talking to exactly to make those decisions. I guess I can tell you from a public health perspective what the thinking is about when we can safely reopen. So there's actually, one of the kind of models we're looking at in terms of when to reopen is called National Coronavirus Response, a Roadmap to Reopening. And the main author is Scott Gottlieb, who is former head of FDA. Basically talks about different phases. So the current phase that we would be considered to be in, and also really if you look at our old pandemic plans that we've also been using, is, we're kind of on the up curve theoretically of, we've just started to get cases really. We've not hit a peak, so we're still on the kind of acceleration phase. So the response phase would be to slow the spread, which is all the things we've been doing, social distancing, closing schools, all the prevention messages we're talking about, wearing face masks in public. So really the goal is to, obviously slow down the spread, protect those people that are most vulnerable, at high risk in our community. So I guess the next phase would be to gradually reopen. So they talk about the triggers for when we potentially could safely start to reopen. So the trigger is considered to be if there's a sustained reduction in cases of at least 14 days. So we don't think we've actually hit the peak. So I don't think we've seen any reduction in cases. Definitely statewide, but regionally, it would be hard to say at this point if we've seen a reduction. So we'll kind of have to keep our eye on that. We are going to do a lot. I think you've heard probably in the media that we're doing more testing over the next several weeks. So we're testing on the weekends. We're increasing our hours during the week for testing. That'll give us more data on, most likely it's going to make it look like we have more cases because we're going to be doing more testing, but it will give us some information about, if we do a lot more testing and we don't find a lot of cases, that's good news. So we'll see what that says. So the other thing that's important before we reopen, at least according to these authors, and most people in public health, I think would agree, is that hospitals are able to safely treat people. So as we reopen, there are going to be more cases because the virus has not gone away. It's still out there. So they have to be able to treat safely. So we have to be at a position where the hospital has enough surge capacity and also enough protective equipment to be able to respond to any resurgence of cases that may come when we reopen. The other thing that needs to be in place is the ability to test a large number of people. So I think really one squeeze that's going on in public health right now is we're trying to investigate cases and follow contacts, but we're also being relied on to do most of the testing currently in the community. So we need to transition a lot of the testing over to the private sector so that your doctor can test you, everybody's doctor can test them. So we need to get to that point, would be helpful, so that public health can concentrate on investigating cases and following contacts. And then that's really the fourth thing, is that public health has the capacity as we reopen. There's going to be, as we reopen, there's going to be new cases. There's going to be clusters of cases. We're still worried about nursing homes and jails, the homeless, and outbreaks within healthcare. So we have to have the public health capacity to kind of put out all those fires. So those are the conditions that most people in public health think would need to be in place before we start to reopen. Obviously we're not there today. And we'll have to see in 2 weeks after we do this increased testing, what it looks like. It's going to be hard to say. I know that the mayor's had a phone call with the governor, I think yesterday. So I'd be kind of interested to know what the governor's indicating to you all. And I'd also be interested to know, I asked this I talked to Washington County commissioners yesterday, what you all are hearing from your constituents about, is everybody, we've seen protests like in Michigan of people protesting the stay-at-home things. Are our local governments getting the same kind of responses from the community about just kind of being fed up with, I guess, what's going on? Because I think from a public health perspective, obviously it would be important to continue a lot of the social distancing for longer, potentially longer than the next 2 weeks.
Some of the calls I've had from businesses has not been in protest, but what they can do to change the way they deliver services and products and services to the public, and very willing to do those things. So I think there's a readiness in our community that we all work together and figure out how to do this so they can, get back in business, but recognizing that they're going to have to limit the number of people who come into their stores, less than 10 at a time. But everybody I've talked to has been very willing to do that and anxious to do it. So I think they're,
yeah, so that's a great point. So even if we do reopen, it's not going to be going back to what we were doing, last year, basically. So there still have to be some kind of social distancing measures in place, limiting size of gatherings, trying to do telework as much as possible. Schools will be a decision, whether schools reopen. I know ETSU is even considering whether they can safely reopen in the fall. So those will all be ongoing discussions. But yeah, for workplaces, we may continue to ask people to wear cloth face masks in public, and some of those other things. So I don't think anyone thinks it'll be like in 2 weeks, flip the switch and we're going to go back to the way we used to do things. So according to the plan that I've been referring to, which I actually sent a copy to Pete and he can share it with you if you want. The executive summary takes only like about 15 minutes to read it. One of the conditions they say for just totally reopening everything would be basically we have a vaccine available, which we know that's not going to be for another year or more, probably. Is anyone else getting kind of beat up by constituents about, I don't know.
I guess I wouldn't frame it that way. And so when I ask the question I'm going to ask, it's not predicated on being beat up. But to the citizen who's looking at this and hearing you cite, 3 or 4 dozen cases in Washington County and thinking perhaps this thing never really was Washington County or Johnson City's problem. And so all this reaction has been overreaction. What do you say to them?
Yeah, you really only have to look at Davidson County. We're not that much different. They're a little bit bigger metropolitan area, obviously, but they have the same kind of people we have, is just people. They're all susceptible to the virus. So certainly the same thing could happen if we hadn't instituted all these social distancing measures and everything that have been put in place. We could be, you know, Davidson County, we could be New York City.
Well, and if I could play devil's advocate, I think they would say we're not Davidson County and we're not New York City. You know, our population density in terms of our political footprint is vastly thinner. And so I guess if I'm hearing anything, it's a level of concern that perhaps our reaction has been, and by our, I don't mean the city commission or even Washington County, but that the reaction nationally has been sort of one size fits all. What do you say with respect to, you know, continuing this for many more months to come, potentially?
Yeah, so in terms of being different than Davidson, like, I think it's a matter of scale. So this past fall and winter, Ballad Health told me that they were, with the influenza, they were in a position where they were getting ready to have to put tents outside the hospital to take care of people with influenza because, you know, the healthcare system was overwhelmed. So I don't think it would take very much for our healthcare system here to get overwhelmed with coronavirus to the point where, you know, we have plans to take care of people in tents. We also have plans to, you know, for if we have more dead bodies than we can handle, you know, in our morgues and our funeral homes, you know, what we're going to do with those. And those are plans we don't really want to tote out. You know, we don't want to have to take care of people in tents. We don't want to have to try to figure out what to do with dead bodies that, you know, we can't handle with our normal situation with morgues and funeral homes. So I don't think we're that far away from having, you know, if we relax too soon, from having a major, you know, it can happen overnight, just like with flu. You know, like one week you hear about flu starting, the next week you hear the hospital's full. It can happen pretty quickly. So I think we do have to be pretty vigilant. And, you know, we can have outbreaks in our nursing homes that you can have a lot of people die very quickly. We can have outbreaks in our jails, among the homeless population, anywhere where there's a large number of people gathered, even our essential businesses that are still open, some of our factories and stuff. You know, if you get cases of coronavirus spreading in anywhere that people are gathered like that, we could have a large number of cases very soon. And those people all go home after work, you know, and can spread it to other people in the community. So it's kind of like, you know, we're trying to keep a forest fire under control, but we still have lots of dead wood, which is people that are not immune to the virus out there. So most of our community is not immune, has not been exposed to the virus yet. So it just takes one spark and we could, you know, just be having, you know, a large epidemic on our hands here.
Dr. Kirschke, if you could comment, I kind of lost the connection a little bit when you were talking about testing, but I think when I looked at the numbers last, in Washington County, we've done less than 600 tests, and our kind of positive run rate's about 7% of that. And you indicated we're going to up the number of tests coming up. What is the number that we're shooting for weekly now to do tests, and that it's open? Is it open to anyone, or how is it going to work in terms of criteria to have a test done?
Yeah, so I think Washington County is in the best position, mostly because of ETSU doing all that testing for the time that they were open. We're in a lot better position to say, you know, we've tested lots of people. We have a fairly low % positive rate. But we certainly have other counties in this area that we've not done as much testing. You know, we've not had ETSU open up, anyone in the private sector open up. So we're basically trying to push testing out to areas where we've not done a lot of testing, because we could have pockets of infections, and even within Washington County, in areas that there's just not been people that have wanted to travel to Johnson City to get tested, which is where most of the testing has occurred. So,
is there a target number? I know one of the components to open back up is to have testing availability. how is our community prepared and ready? And are we going to have ample tests to be able to do that? And you mentioned getting them out in the practices. How far are we away from people being able to go to their doctor and get it done?
Yeah, so theoretically, people could go to their doctor. I think a lot of doctors have kind of like shuttered up and are just doing telehealth now, and not really wanting to see people that have symptoms consistent with coronavirus. Some are doing it, and that's really great, and we appreciate that. But for a large proportion of people, doctors are just sending them to the health department to get tested, which is fine. Right now, we're happy to do that. But kind of moving forward, some of the testing is going to have to get shifted back over to people's, primary care doctor or whatever, so that public health. In the next phase, when we do reopen, we're going to spend a lot of energy tracking down every case and trying to make sure all the contacts are quarantined and, trying to protect the public once we do start to reopen. So in terms of who can get tested, so we do have ample tests to test anyone that wants to get tested. We primarily, the biggest bang for the buck is people that have symptoms that are consistent with coronavirus. But basically, the governor said whoever wants to get tested can get tested. So we're not really screening out anybody for the testing. So that kind of leaves the door open for people with no symptoms to come get tested, which we will do that. But be careful to explain to people what the results would mean. So, there can be rare instances where people are asymptomatic and are infected. So it would be pretty hard to find those people by just randomly testing. We'd probably have to test 1,000 people to find one person that was asymptomatically infected. So there's not a lot of bang for the buck to test asymptomatic people. If we did test someone that's asymptomatic, the recommendation would be that they stay home from work while they're awaiting their test result. So that's somewhat problematic. And then the other thing is a negative test really doesn't do anything for you. So we've had some employers in the community say, oh, I want all my employees to have a negative test before they come to work. The problem, negative test really only means you were negative the day they swabbed your nose, because coronavirus is circulating in the community. You could have your nose swabbed, test gets sent off, it's negative, but right after you left getting swabbed, you went to the grocery store, or you were around someone with coronavirus and now you're infected. So negative results don't really help anything for the average person in the community. And finding someone that's asymptomatically positive is probably going to be pretty rare. So we don't really recommend people that don't have symptoms get tested, because it's pretty unlikely that they have coronavirus.
Doctor, is there a test that indicates whether you've already had it? And if so, is that out there for the general public? Can you speak on that?
Yeah, so the antibody test that you've heard probably about in the news, that's what that test would tell you. The current problem with antibody tests are that there's a whole bunch of them out there, and it's unclear which ones are reliable and which ones aren't. So there can be a lot of bad tests out there. So the thing that an antibody test does tell you, if it were reliable, is that you've been infected in the past and now have antibodies, which probably would indicate that you're immune. So if we had a reliable antibody test, as we move into the next phase where we reopen things, if you could say test all your employees with an antibody test and figure out who had gotten infected during the first part of the pandemic, and now looks like they're immune, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to get reinfected. We don't know that 100%, but that's what people think, is that at least you'll have some short-term immunity. So those people would be unlikely to get reinfected. So it'd be safer for them to come out and start working than other people that haven't been infected. There's also some question about whether those people that do have antibodies it would be safer for them to work with people that are infected. So in the healthcare community, healthcare workers that have been infected in the past can more safely treat a person that's currently infected because there's less risk they're going to get reinfected. So there is some use for the antibody test. It's not a good test to tell whether you're infected right now because it takes a while for it to become positive. So it's not as useful for that.
Are there other questions for Dr. Kirschke?
It's one more.
It's
I
Sure.
don't have a question, but a comment. Granted, I'm around healthcare people, not around them, but I'm talking to them. And the comments I hear are that what we're doing seems to be working. That I think our citizens have taken it seriously and are doing what they need to do, and just being very cautious about opening up too soon. I think Dr. Wyckoff and Dr. Block wrote a pretty good editorial today in the Johnson City Press, which sort of outlined some of the thoughts. And I think that a lot of the healthcare community shares those thoughts.
Yeah, I agree too.
I have another, I guess, question along these lines. You used the metaphor of like a fire, forest fire, and there being a lot of dead wood. This seems to me to be kind of like a brush fire, and we put it out over here, and then we turn around and it's on fire beside us or behind us or 50 feet to our side.
Yeah, I agree with that.
When you think in terms of recent pandemics like SARS or swine flu, how did those didn't resolve themselves purely by getting to the point of vaccination, did they? Like, is there some hope that this can resolve itself or at least be contained so that quote unquote life as normal can resume sooner than what sounds like a year and a half?
Yeah, so the difference between the current coronavirus and either SARS or like the avian flu that was going around in Asia is that the current coronavirus is much more contagious than either of those two things were. So like the avian flu primarily was people that worked with basically birds, like had backyard flocks of chickens and things like that. And then SARS was much more, it was not as contagious. So it was easier to stop the spread of it because if you isolated a case, you know, it kind of stopped the spread. Even though both those things are more deadly than the coronavirus, they did not spread as easily as the coronavirus. So yeah, that's the difference there. And then it seemed like your question had another part.
Yeah, I mean, how do we get to resolution without a vaccine?
Yeah, so well, so some people hope that over the summer there'll be just a decrease, like because of environmental reasons, that the virus won't survive as well. Hoping that there's some seasonal pattern to the virus, like so we've not had enough time to determine if there's a seasonal pattern because it's not been around for a year. But I think there is some hope that the summer might help. But other than that, really, it'll take, doing the social distancing to get the numbers way down, and then carefully reopening and trying to detect every little kind of, going back to the forest fire, every time we see a little bit of smoke, we send out the fire department, which is the health department, to put that out by doing isolation and quarantine. But we also have to try to get rid of some of the dead wood. So, the social distancing will have to stay in place so we don't, the spark doesn't have a lot of fuel to get going. So, people being more careful when they're in public, washing their hands frequently, wearing cloth face masks, doing some social distancing, even on the job site, like work at home, and things like that. So, yeah, we just need to do things to make the virus less infectious by not giving it the chance to jump from one person to a whole bunch of other people.
Commissioner Hunter, did you have another question a minute ago?
I did. I think one of the things I'd heard is, as we see the projections of flattening the curve, it pushes the peak closer towards fall, which means, obviously that means more people will be affected in the fall season, which is typically a flu season.
Right.
Would that, by pushing the curve out, although the peak would be lower than with nothing, does that not bring risk of the fire starting greater because you're heading into a typical flu season when these types of things are exacerbated?
Yeah, so potentially. So a lot of people think there might be 2 waves. So like in the scenario where it decreases over the summer and there's just, because of environmental reasons, there's not a lot of transmission in the summer. People think that in the fall there could be a second wave where there's a lot of cases. There's always really a possibility for more waves as long as we have a lot of people that aren't immune to the virus. So, because we're doing a good job at flattening the curve, most of our people in Johnson City and Washington County and Northeast Tennessee have not gotten sick. I think the main thing, eventually, if we don't get a vaccine, in the next 18 months or whatever, a lot of people may end up getting the virus at some point. And so the reason for flattening the curve in that situation is that you don't really want to get sick when the hospital is already full and there's like no ventilators left, because then you'll be, really sick and you'll be out in the tent with no, help and potentially no medicine to help you. You won't have access to a ventilator. So flattening the curve really is to try to spread it out so that the healthcare system always has capacity to take care of the people that are the sickest from the virus. So hopefully decreasing the total mortality from the outbreak. But it does come at an economic cost of having to continue the social distancing for a longer period of time.
Any other questions for
Yeah,
Dr.
for anyone who's really wanting to go to, let's say, Dollywood this summer, should they just expect that that's a 2021 thing?
I would probably push it out. It's going to be hard to say that in the fall going to Dollywood's a good idea. Like I said, ETSU is even considering, trying to think about whether it's going to be safe to reopen ETSU in the fall. Because, you think about a university, we could be doing the greatest job in the world here in Northeast Tennessee. But as soon as the university opens up, you're going to have kids coming in from, all over not only all over the country, but all over the world that could be bringing in virus to our community. And the same thing, if you go to Dollywood, East Tennessee might be doing a great job, but when you go to Dollywood, there's going to be people from, all over the place, New York and New Orleans or wherever, places where there's lots of circulation of the virus. So, it's going to be different for a while. So even if we do go somewhat back to normal, I don't know, maybe Dollywood will figure out some kind of way to make it so that it's less crowded or something. But I would continue to be careful into the fall. But we'll see. We kind of really have to take it, weeks and months at a time, and see what the situation is.
One more question, Mayor, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
In reference to face masks, and I guess specifically just cloth masks, but maybe just in general, the point of having the face mask, and if you can give clarification too, is my understanding is not necessarily to protect yourself, but to protect others potentially. Is that correct?
Yep, that's exactly right. So because we think that about a quarter of people with coronavirus might not have symptoms. So if someone did have coronavirus, obviously we tell them to stay home. But if for some reason they had to go to the doctor, we would tell them to put on a mask to help prevent them from spreading it to the healthcare workers. So it's basically the same idea. I might be sitting here, I might have had contact unknowingly a couple of days ago with someone with coronavirus, and I might be incubating it and I'm going to get sick tomorrow. But we know that people can spread it for the couple of days before they get sick and also sometimes be asymptomatic and spread it. So if you put everyone in a face mask when they're in public, it decreases the amount of respiratory secretions. People spray out when they talk or cough or sneeze. And that can just kind of add another layer of protection as we're doing our social distancing. I have seen, I've had to go to the grocery store a couple times in the last few weeks, and I've noticed not everybody, but I would say most people were wearing some kind of face covering. So seems like there's decent uptake on that, not universal though.
Okay. Anything else? We might just, and Pete kind of weigh in here. You may have seen today where the 4 big cities in Tennessee, Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, and Chattanooga are going to band together to come up with a, I guess, recovery plan. Probably the best way to phrase that, in a reopening plan. We should anticipate some guidance coming out of the governor's office at the end of the month. And actually, the TV on in the background right now, we're seeing it in Washington, that's being presented as well as kind of a reopening plan. Next week, we'll be meeting the 3 city managers, Mayor Venable, Grandy, Schul, Feyerabend, and myself will be meeting to look regionally, since we did everything regionally on the front end, looking at that kind of recovery reopening plan so that we're all lined up. As close as we are, and as people work back and forth in the cities, we all need to be on the same page in the way we're going to be doing that. So we have some time to get it together, but we'll kind of keep you posted after that first meeting and see where everybody is. Pete, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think one of the important things to remember there is that we need to have guidance and input from our healthcare community, as well as our commercial and industrial community, our business community, so that we hear all sides of this challenge as we put a recovery plan together to go forward. So as the mayor pointed out, we wanted to get a group together next week and see if everybody was of a like mindset in putting together a regional plan. And I think that the step, one of the first steps would be to get input from Dr. Kirschke and his counterparts at Sullivan County Health Department, Ballard, ETSU Health, and get their perspective on where we are and how best to go forward with developing a recovery plan, and then sit down with the business community and get their viewpoints, see where they need help, what's going to work, what won't work, and from that come up with a plan to where we can safely get a maximum return on investment as we open this thing back up, recognizing that one of our most valuable resources is the safety and health of our community, and recognizing that needs to be our primary focus as we open this economy back up. I think it's going to be really imperative that we move pretty swiftly on this in the next couple of weeks. Just while the governor didn't say it, my gut feel was, in listening to him the other day, was first of the month. I think he's going to lift his order to some degree or another, and maybe to the extent of saying that the state's not going to do anything more, and it will be up to the local governments to develop their own plans. As has been pointed out, different areas of the state have been impacted differently, and it may take some fine tuning at the local level in order to come up with a plan that will work at each location. Somebody had asked earlier, we were talking about the impacts across the state, and I looked at the website late this afternoon. In Washington County, 7.7% of all the tests given have been positive. Statewide, 7.3% of all the tests given have been positive. So I think we're pretty reflective of what's going on across the state in general. Now, when you pull out Davidson County specifically, 14.4% of their tests have been positive. Davidson County has done a little over 9,000 tests. Washington County has done 595. So, I don't think there's a huge difference in the results that folks are getting. I think it's largely, the numbers are largely driven by the population density and the location that you're at. So I think that is a very prolific statement that what we have been doing is working. It's been very effective, and that we need to be just as judicious coming out of this thing as we did going into it. So we look forward to working with a lot of different folks, getting a lot of different input so that we can put a plan together that will keep us safe and healthy while at the same time getting our economy back up on its feet.
Okay, if there's no other questions, Dr. Kirschke, thank you so much for zooming in with us and being informative. And we look forward, as always, working with the Health Department. Y'all have been a great partner as we've navigated these waters. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And this, like Mr. Peterson said, I don't think there's any way to do this without, government and public health kind of working together, because from a public health perspective, if we keep everything shut down for the next 18 months till we have a vaccine, that would be the safest thing to do. But we know that our people in the community aren't going to be able to survive that, economically, especially people that are living paycheck to paycheck. So we'll have to figure out the safest way to move forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Mayor, your next order of business is the presentation of a proclamation recognizing Crime Victims' Rights Week.
Yes, sir. And I have the proclamation to read. So, whereas Tennesseans are the victims of thousands of crimes each year affecting individuals, families, and our communities. And whereas years of Tennessee's investment in crime victims' rights and services have developed a system of response that can help victims recover from crime. And whereas reaching and serving all victims of crime is essential to thriving communities, because those who receive holistic services and support are more likely to remain invested in their communities. And whereas dedicated victim services providers are working every day to meet the needs of victims, yet there are still too many survivors without meaningful access to rights and services. And whereas many survivors face barriers such as isolation, language limitations, distrust of the system, lack of transportation, or cultural barriers that keep them from accessing the services and systems that can help them recover. And whereas we as Tennesseans must make a dedicated effort to expand the circle of those prepared to respond to victims and link them to the resources. And whereas engaging a broader array of healthcare providers, community leaders, faith organizations, educators, and businesses can provide new links between victims and services that improve their safety, healing, and access to justice. And whereas National Crime Victims' Rights Week provides us an opportunity to recommit to ensuring that all victims of crimes, especially those who are challenging to reach or serve, are afforded their rights and receive trauma-informed response. And whereas the Tennessee Board of Parole, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and the Tennessee Department of Corrections victim services professionals are dedicated to strengthening victims and survivors in the aftermath of crime, building resilience in our communities and our victims, responders, and working for justice for all victims and survivors. Now, therefore, I, Jenny O'Brien, Mayor of the City of Johnson City, do hereby proclaim the week of April 19th through 25th of 2020 as Crime Victims' Rights Week. So I don't know who would have been here, Mr. Peterson, to accept this, but if we could make sure they get a copy of this and our commitment to support the victims of crime in our community.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Your next order of business is consideration of the consent agenda.
Okay, are there any items that you would like to pull for further discussion on the consent agenda? I'll just let you speak up if you like. Okay, I do have a question, Mr. Peterson, about 5.11. Is there anything else anybody would like? And I feel like I ought to just at least mention the mowing of the I-26, just in honor of our previous mayor, Jeff Banyas, but I'll let it go.
I was going to do that too.
Oh, okay. Well,
You were going to do what, Jay? You were going to let it go, or you were going to speak on it?
I was going to say Jeff Daniels wants to make sure they pick the litter up before they run the lawnmowers over it.
Okay.
Pete, the question on work order 61 for tank industry consultants, this is, do we already have a contract with them? It just was, look, this is really not a bid. This is just approval. Let's see. Go ahead and just run through that one real quick.
We have a master services agreement contract with TIC, and they're the company that we rely on to do our inspections and bid specs for recoatings and repair work on all of our water reservoirs.
Okay.
So what this is a work order for them to do the technical specifications, help us with the bid, administer the construction contract, do any testing, the 1-year anniversary inspection of the 2 million gallon water reservoir up on Master's Knob. So we have to get all this ready to bid, and then we'll have to bid the work out, and there will be another company that will actually come in and do the recoating. And these recoatings are inside and out, and it involves draining the tank, doing a visual inspection, exterior and interior. If there are any repairs need to be done, then they will prepare the specs on that, and then the recoating work.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, if there's no other comments on the consent agenda, is there a motion?
Question
One
to
more question. I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Pete, were you able to find out anything about that % increase on the hardware maintenance renewal?
Yes, sir. This is the support that we get for our legacy software that does all of our payables, receivables, payroll, HR, utility billing, everything. We've had this agreement with them since we've had this software, which probably, I know it goes back to the 80s. There have, through the years, there have been increases larger than this. There have been increases not quite this great. I think this is just a hunch. They know that we're looking at new software, and that there's a probability that we will be changing vendors. So I think the 9% increase may reflect a little bit of the fact that they recognize this may be the last year that we do business with them. It's the only firm that offers us support and maintenance for this particular software. So we've really got nobody else to go to. Just as a tangent conversation of that, the in-house work group is still moving forward on developing an RFP for new financial software or legacy software for all of our functions. Hopefully we'll have that out to bid and be starting the install 10 months or so. So that will be a significant expenditure that we will incur in FY21, but we need to keep that moving and make a change.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, any other comments? Is there a motion?
Move for approval.
All right, Commissioner
I'll second.
Fowler, and is there a second?
I'll second that.
Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wise,
Yes.
Mayor Brock.
Yes.
At this time, I would like to ask you to add to the agenda to make appointments to the Board of Equalization.
All right, is there a motion to add it to the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion and a second. Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wise,
Yes.
Mayor Brock.
Yes.
Thank you. At this time, we would like for you to consider making 2 appointments to the Board of Equalization. Your current representatives on that 5-member board are Al Spritzer and Polly Peterson. Ms. Peterson has agreed to serve again if asked, and Dr. Spritzer has asked not to be reappointed. We have had interest expressed by Dick Manahan and PC Snap, and the recommendation would be for you to appoint Mr. Manahan and Mrs. Peterson to serve on that board.
I'll make a motion to approve the recommendation of Ms. Peterson correctly,
Yes, sir.
and Dr. Manahan,
All
who
right, there's a motion, second.
served with.
Second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any other comments? Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wise,
Yes.
Mayor Brock.
Yes.
Okay, your next order of business is consideration of ordinance number 473520. It's actually a resolution. A resolution to annex certain properties located within the 12th Civil District of Washington County, Tennessee, adjoining the present corporate boundaries of the city of Johnson City, Tennessee, and to incorporate the same within the corporate boundaries of the city of Johnson City, Tennessee, said properties being known as the stewardship annexation. To zone said properties B4 planned arterial business as described herein, and to amend the zoning map of the city of Johnson City, Tennessee accordingly, being a part of the appendix to ordinance number 1519. This is ready for your consideration on 3rd and final reading. This is the property out on Bobby Hicks Highway that you have considered on the previous 2 readings. No changes since your last reading.
Move approval.
Second.
I think you're muted, Jenny.
Somebody would probably like to mute me more often. Sorry about that. We have a motion and a second. Is there any other comment? Ms. Jennings, if you call the roll.
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wise,
Yes.
Mayor Brock.
Yes.
The next item is ordinance number 4735-20. An ordinance to amend the zoning map of the city of Johnson City, Tennessee, being part of the appendix to ordinance number 1519, entitled an ordinance to adopt a code of laws and ordinances for the city of Johnson City, Tennessee, and to repeal all laws and ordinances in conflict therewith and amendatory thereof by assigning B4 planned arterial business zoning to certain property within the 12th Civil District of Washington County, Tennessee, known as the stewardship annexation. Ready for your consideration on 3rd and final reading.
Okay.
Move approval.
Is there a
Second.
second? Motion and a second. Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wise,
Yes.
and Mayor Brock.
Yes.
Next
So-
on your agenda is public input.
Yeah, we did not receive any inquiries or emails for public input, so I will not open public input.
Okay, your next item for consideration is to consider approval for placement of a mural in the general vicinity of Founders Park on the wall adjacent to Wild Wings Cafe on Commerce Street. Within your packet is a graphic representation of what the mural would look like. I believe Mr. Penzola sent out an informational email either yesterday or today explaining that this work would be paid for by the Public Art Committee. And we have written approval by Mr. Baker, who owns the wall on which the mural would be displayed. And we are recommending your approval.
All right, is there a motion, commissioners?
I would move to approve.
I'll second that.
Motion and second. Any other discussion? Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wise,
Yes.
Mayor Brock.
Yes.
The next item of business is consider the placement of a mural on a wall that belongs to Summers Hardware and Supply that fronts along Ash Street, right across from the Ash Street Post Office Courthouse building. This is a mural recognizing women's suffrage centennial celebration. There's a graphic representation in your packet of what the mural will look like. Again, this is something that will be paid for by the Public Art Committee. Both of these murals will require a little bit of help from Public Works, but it's very minimal work on our behalf. We do have permission from the property owners to put the mural on the wall, and we would recommend your approval.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any other comments? Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wise,
Yes.
Mayor Brock.
Yes.
Okay, this takes you to the manager's report on your agenda. Again, this week has been pretty filled with ensuring that we had good compliance with the stay-at-home order and with the changes with the COVID virus. I think you're all aware that we have appointed Will Ryder as the public health officer, and he's using the codes enforcement group to field questions and comments and make site visits. I think they have stayed pretty busy this week. They've made a number of site visits to follow up on businesses that were operating that shouldn't have, and to also visit a number of locations to ensure compliance and to offer guidance. There are a number of businesses that are essential businesses in town that are open, that are doing a really good job with marking places on the floor, identifying the proper social distancing, shields between employees and customers, announcements on their PA systems, those types of things. He's visited a couple of manufacturing sites to ensure compliance in the manufacturing community. I think has done a really, really good job with trying to stay open and still meet all of the requirements of the governor and our requirements. There is one local business here that set up social distancing and offered up to their employees that anybody that wanted to not continue working, that I think they were furloughed and given a chance to draw unemployment and not lose their benefits. And those employees who chose to stay and work, they gave them, I think, a $200 a week bonus for coming in and working. So, I think there's a really good faith effort by 99% of all of our businesses to do the right thing and to try to find a way to meet the requirements, but yet keep their doors open and their employees working to the fullest extent that they can. We've had a group, as I've mentioned before, from the Conventions and Visitors Bureau and the Chamber and NetRep and the JCDA that's calling local businesses, offering support, offering guidance, trying to answer their questions, and just to kind of check in and see how they're doing and to see if there's anything that we can offer to be a further assistance to them to ensure that they remain open and that they're able to make ends meet through these difficult times. Those calls have been very well received. I know that there are some businesses that we talk to regularly, and we're also contacting and starting to talk to some folks perhaps that we don't talk to very often. And I think it's been a really positive environment in which to better relationships with some folks and to establish good positive relationships with other folks. So that's been quite a bit of load for probably a dozen people within those organizations to get all of that up and running and going. So we're really proud to point out that that's happening. There's going to be a big announcement tomorrow about a fundraising effort to raise money regionally to be shared with distressed businesses in the region. I'm not going to steal anybody's thunder from tomorrow, but anybody watching, look for a big announcement tomorrow. It's everybody's chance to pitch in and help our fellow citizens, friends, and neighbors as they and their businesses navigate these challenging times with the economy right now. Building permits and the development services group has a pretty normal workload right now. We're seeing fairly decent activity there. I do think that most of the activity they're seeing is work that's been in the pipeline for a little while, and the disruption in that industry probably hasn't hit just yet. I think the real challenging time for that industry could be a month or so out, when all of the backlog of work that was already in the system is worked through. So we'll continue to monitor that very closely. We continue to have daily discussions about the budget, this year's budget, next year's budget. And an important note here, please make sure that you have on your calendars, we have another meeting scheduled for Thursday, April the 30th, to work on budget. Let me look here real quick and see what time that is.
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. Okay, thank you, sir. At that meeting, we'll be working on the FY21 budget, and we will also be giving you a good detailed recap on the FY20 budget. Preliminarily, right now, the FY20 budget is much more challenging than the FY21 budget because all the employees and positions have been paid out through 9 months. All the capital equipment's been bought, all the capital projects have been started and are being paid out. There's just really, we've paved out a little over 2 million of the $3 million paving budget. So there's just not any really big pots of money to go to soften the blow this year. March sales taxes, we will not have that information for another 30 to 40 days. So it's kind of a crapshoot as to where we're going to land with sales tax. We got the hotel motel information. The latest I got was that the occupancy rate overall for the month of March was 40%. It probably naturally runs 60 to 65%, with a footnote that the last 2 weeks were a total disaster. So it sounds like the first 2 weeks of March were good, and the last 2 weeks of March were not so good. There was one of the early weeks, I noticed citywide, we had rented a little over 800 rooms for a single night. And I looked the third week of March, and for a single night, we had rented just a little over 80 rooms. So the hotel motel business is probably off 80 to 90% currently. Don't know about getting that started again. That's something we'll have to work through. So hotel motel taxes are definitely way off. At the end of January, we were about $700,000 ahead of budget on sales taxes. $700,000 is roughly a half a month's collections on a 12-month average basis. And I'm going to hit Janet with a question here. Janet, we didn't happen to get February numbers today, did we?
I have not. I did not look, but I can look.
Okay. I didn't ask Bob, he hadn't seen them. So we're kind of on the cusp as to when the February numbers will be coming in. So, we're expecting hotel motel taxes and sales taxes to be very minimalistic, especially for the months of April, May, and June. That's worth about $2 million a month to us. So we have shut down capital projects. I don't think there was any capital equipment to shut down. There's still about $1 million worth of paving that was budgeted this year that we will not do this spring. Vacant positions that are not absolutely critical, we've frozen those and recaptured the salaries associated with those positions. We have seasonal people that work in the parks part-time or seasonal and temporary positions. The ones that had already come on, we have terminated those positions since we can't open up the parks and we can't open up the community centers. There's really not a lot for those folks to do. We've taken full-time staff in the parks, center supervisors and directors, and repurpose them into other functions within the park system. We've had to repurpose probably half a dozen people to go out and monitor park sites to ensure proper social distancing and to help with just keeping the parks cleaned up and those types of things, since we do have the social distancing requirements in our park system. Right now, my best guess would be that we're probably going to hit fund balance for somewhere in the $3 to $5 million range in order to balance the books for FY20. Right now, we're looking for FY21 with no capital projects, no capital equipment. Don't know if paving's going to stay in or out. We're unfunding quite a few unfilled positions. We're any place that we can look operationally, probably will not be funding any travel or conferences or professional registrations. We're going to have to look really hard and really deep in order to get close to having an FY21 budget that will not require us to go to fund balance. Now, if we get into a bad situation again for a prolonged amount of time next winter and the economy gets negatively impacted more than what we're budgeting for, then we're kind of at the mercy of the local economy. Right now, we're looking at probably a 10% decline, 10 to 12% reduction in sales tax numbers year to year. We'll be looking at a reduction in hotel motel tax. I think with the economy being where it is, we'll need to budget less next year in property tax collections than we did this year. I think there's going to be some folks that's going to be a real challenge. We'll probably not collect quite as much as we historically do in terms of percentage. This is very reminiscent of some budgets that we worked on in 2001, 2002. They were very difficult budgets, but thankfully we got through those. Perhaps this is even more similar to the, what was it, 2009, 2010 budgets, in that revenues were way off, but we had made some really good decisions in the preceding years when things were good, and we had very adequate fund balance available to get us through a rough time. In that time period is when we did almost $100 million worth of construction, because we were able to get projects done for about 65 to 75 cents on the dollar, and we were borrowing money for less than 1%. Now, is this going to present another one of those opportunities? That's yet to be determined. We can hope for the best. I would tell you that with some circumstances like that and some very strategic reinvestment into our infrastructure, that we can get a tremendous amount of work done for a really good price if those conditions represent themselves. If they don't, I think we've got adequate fund balance to get us through a couple of years and still deliver quality services and the essential services that our citizens demand and expect. So, in one sense, this is going to be a challenging budget. And in another sense, as I have jokingly said, but it really is true, the budget's a lot easier when you're broke than it is when you have a lot of money, because there's really not a lot of decisions to be made. I'd be glad to answer any questions. I know that you all may have several questions for me this evening.
Do we still need to have that budget meeting next week? That was a very thorough report, Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, I better let you know what we're not funding next year if you're going to vote on it. And again, we'll meet on the 30th, and this will be the manager's initial budget to you all. And of course, we'll walk through it to whatever level of detail you like and make adjustments to it. The manager's budget has to be printed in the paper, whatever Saturday is. I think Saturday's May the 2nd next week. So we'll meet on the 30th. It'll be printed in the paper on the 2nd. It will actually have to go to the paper Monday the 27th. So we'll try to get a copy of it out to you all on the 27th. That way you can look at it for a couple of days before our meeting on the 30th.
So Pete, just one question, your advice. As I mentioned just a minute ago, the president's just put out a 3-phase plan to reopen the economy. So that's going to start getting a lot of piqued interest in our area. Like I said, I think the governor will probably come out with something at the end of the month, and we're going to be working on it, but we're going to start getting calls. I've already gotten 2 today, and I'm sure other commissioners are going to get them as people are hearing about this and say, okay, well, what does that mean in our area? So do you want everything just to go through Safer at Home, or how do you want to handle these inquiries that we get?
I would channel everything through the Safer at Home at johnsoncitytn.org. That way we've got a central repository with all of the questions and all the responses, and we'll be assured of consistency and timeliness of response and what information is given back. I mean, based on where we are and based on the information from Dr. Kirschke tonight, the governor has his existing order in place through the end of the month. I think the response at this time is that absolutely nothing will change before the 1st of May. And in the meantime, we need to have some of these meetings we referenced earlier and develop a plan as to how we want to move forward after the 1st of the month.
With both of these calls, I ask them to send an email so that there's something documented.
Thank you.
We can just pass it on. Right.
Yes,
Would
ma'am.
recommend that to everybody. Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions of city manager? Okay. Are we through with the agenda?
Yes, ma'am. That brings us to the end of the agenda.
Okay, well, let's just go around the horn then. Commissioner Hunter, you've got any added comments or questions for tonight?
None of the committees that I serve on have met, so we're good.
Okay, Commissioner Fowler?
Danny, my friend over in Greenville, physician that has been in the hospital here, got extubated yesterday. He had been intubated for 8 days. So
Really?
just keep him in your prayers to keep moving forward to get over this, because I'm sure 8 days on a vent, he's had some damage to both lungs. So anyway, that's not easy to get over no matter what, but thankfully he's a pretty healthy guy. So he's got that going for him.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that.
Uh-huh.
Commissioner Calhoun, lost you.
We
There you are.
have a planning commission Zoom meeting scheduled for April 27th. So I'm sure there's going to be quite a bit of stuff to deal with there, because we haven't had a meeting this last month.
I'll mention this morning, there was a meeting with the Northeast Tennessee Association of Realtors, and they invited the area mayors to attend by Zoom. And it was really a very powerful meeting. And I think we all learned more from them than they learned from us completely. And I just sent you an analysis for their March housing and I guess commercial markets. Just a couple quick things that Don Finley gave an update on the residential, and that's still remaining fairly strong. What they are seeing right now is that there is a reduction of listings, that started about mid-March, early March, just with the statement that people don't want to list their house right now, thinking it wouldn't sell during this time, and they don't want it on the market so long. So that was just one issue on the residential. The real concerning piece was the commercial, and Jerry Petzel gave probably a 30-minute update on commercial property. Being, I guess, a landlord as well, very concerned about some of his tenants who are indicating they just don't know if they can stay in business or not. And so his concerns were, vacant commercial property soon. And he even brought this up too, that because we've been doing a lot of remote working, people may just stay working remote, which might then as well impact commercial property.
I for one will not be.
Right. So anyway, it's a powerful group, and as you know, they're a bellwether in our community on how things are going. So it's good meeting. But if you get a chance to look over the data that's shared right there, I think it can give us some good insight as to what's going on. Anything else?
I guess I would just report the JCDA has a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. And for those on the commission who may not be tracking with the calendar, the JCDA was given notice by the NetRep organization that the JCDA could no longer function as a component part of NetRep as NetRep begins to look at its future. And so the JCDA is tasked with needing to begin to first identify an executive director for the JCDA, identify space for the JCDA office, and identify administrative and accounting supports after that transition. So even though we've not met in person over the last, I guess, nearly month and a half, we have had a couple of electronic meetings, and the JCDA is handling a number of open issues that are pretty significant, I think, in their long-term implications for that organization.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else? All right. Hearing
I
nothing.
checked.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry,
What?
I just want to give you an update. I checked for the February numbers. They are not yet posted.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, one final thing. Pete, we have a couple of letters that Bridge wrote for us to send to our representatives in Washington and Nashville, I believe. There was that other issue that I shared with you today about the real estate group that in the current stimulus number 3, because they're a 501(c)(3) they're not eligible for anything, and they're all hoping that we could reflect that in our communication with our legislators. So we may want to add some of that to those letters. The letters that Bridge wrote for us are to, particularly to our DC delegation about things that are needed, coming up and what we're seeing here in the community. I thought they were well written. We just need to kind of finalize them now and get them sent.
Yes, ma'am.
And the other thing, we didn't mention some of the work that Bridge is going to be doing for us is really looking at the money that's coming through the stimulus packages through the CARES Act, and then number 4, and then to really aggressively look at what we might be eligible for and the application process and how we might go after this money as well. So I think next week they're going to have kind of a flow chart on some of these funds that are out there that we can, whether they come through the state or whether we apply directly. So that will be really helpful. All right. Okay. Anything else? Meeting adjourned.
Good night.
Night.
Right.